She said, "This is no longer your home." I didn't answer. In one night, I took everything that was mine. If this story caught your attention from the very first words, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment. Your opinion matters, and I read every response. My name is Michael, and I never thought I'd live to see the day when the person I once shared everything with would turn into my enemy in my own house. I came back after a long day at work, exhausted but hoping for a quiet evening. When I slid my key into the lock, it didn't fit. I tried again and again until I finally realized the locks had been changed. My heart pounded harder than ever before, and 100 explanations raced through my mind. But the answer was already waiting on my phone screen. "You won't get any keys. This is my house now." The message was from Sarah. My Sarah, the woman with whom I bought this house, picked out the furniture, planted trees in the yard. And now she had erased it all with a single sentence. I stood there on the porch like a stranger. Night was already falling. Neighbors passed by throwing curious glances, but no one stopped. It was humiliation, sharp and raw, impossible to put into words. Everything inside, my documents, my clothes, even family photographs, was suddenly considered hers. I felt like I had been erased from my own story. The message had no explanation, just a cold statement of fact. I could have called her, demanded answers, but something inside me kept me silent. It was the calm before a storm. I sat in my car for a long time, anger mixing with a strange sense of clarity. A thought flashed through my mind. Fine. If she thinks she can make decisions for me, I'll show her what a real decision looks like. I remembered the spare keys I had left years ago in my friend Jack's garage. Not on purpose, just out of habit. I always liked to be prepared. Back then, I never imagined those keys would save me from my own wife. Night fell fast. I returned quietly, headlights off, like a thief in my own life. Every step sounded too loud, every movement dangerous. I unlocked the door with the spare key, and inside, a wave of memories hit me. The smell of coffee Sarah always drank in the morning, the paintings we bought at flea markets, the rug we argued about for weeks. But now, those memories felt poisoned. This wasn't our home anymore. This was the house she had declared hers alone. I started gathering my things. Carefully, without rushing. Every shirt, every book, even the mug a colleague once gave me seemed to whisper, "This is yours, take it." I wasn't just collecting belongings. I was reclaiming pieces of myself she had tried to erase. And the more boxes I carried out to the car, the more I felt my strength returning. I knew, tomorrow, she would wake up in a house that was no longer the same. But that night, step by step, I took back what she had tried to steal from me. Want to know what happened next? Subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll tell you the rest. When I carried out the last box to my car that night, I sat behind the wheel and let the silence surround me. The street was quiet, the windows of the house dark, and for the first time in weeks I felt that I was breathing fully again. I didn't drive away immediately. I just stayed there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the home that had once been the center of my world. I thought about how many hours I had spent painting those walls, fixing the creaky steps, building the deck where Sarah and I had shared so many summer evenings. Now it was a shell, stripped of everything that mattered to me. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. What I felt was a strange kind of justice. She had tried to erase me, but I had made sure that every trace of me was gone only because I took it myself. I spent the night in a motel on the edge of town. The room smelled of stale smoke and the carpet was older than me, but it felt safer than the house I had once called mine. I stacked the boxes against the wall and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind replayed the message she had sent. No explanation, no anger, no attempt at a conversation. Just a declaration that it was hers. The audacity of it kept me awake, the arrogance that she believed she could decide my place in life with a sentence. I knew Sarah was stubborn, but this was more than stubbornness. This was war. The next morning I drove back, not to confront her, but to watch. I parked down the street where she couldn't see me and waited. At exactly 8:30 the front door opened, and she stepped out wearing her usual business suit, coffee in hand, acting as though nothing in the world had changed. I saw her glance at the porch, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the boxes I had left for her, neatly stacked and labeled. For a moment she froze, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Then she bent down, opened one box, and rifled through the items. She pulled out a sweater I had once bought for her birthday, looked at it for a long second, then tossed it back with a sharp movement. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just picked up her bag and walked to her car. That coldness told me more than any words could. I didn't follow her. I stayed hidden and waited until she drove off before I approached the house again. Inside, the air was heavier, emptier. Without my belongings, the rooms looked bare, as though the house itself had lost its soul. I walked through slowly, each step echoing. The photographs were gone, the bookshelves half empty, the kitchen cabinets lighter. But what struck me most was the silence. The home that once carried the sound of laughter, arguments, and clinking glasses was now hollow. I left without touching anything. I wanted her to feel that emptiness every time she walked through the door. Over the next few days, I lived in that motel, going to work, keeping my routine, but every evening I felt the pull to drive past the house. Sometimes I saw her lights on, sometimes I didn't. Once I spotted another car in the driveway, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. My jaw clenched. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that I had walked away, but something inside me refused to let go. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the principle. She had thrown me out, and now she was filling the void with someone else. One night, I sat in the diner across from the motel, sipping bad coffee and staring at the condensation on the window. A man about my age sat down across from me uninvited. He had a rugged look, jeans worn thin, and eyes that seemed too curious. "You look like hell," he said bluntly. I almost told him to mind his own business, but instead I asked what made him say that. He chuckled and said he had seen me driving past the same street 3 nights in a row. My pulse quickened. He introduced himself as Frank, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from Sarah. He leaned in and told me he had noticed the change, the new locks, the boxes on the porch. Then, with a knowing look, he added, "She's been bringing people over." I felt a sharp twist in my chest, not of heartbreak, but of something darker. Frank said he thought I had a right to know, since he had seen me circling the block. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry, just left me with that piece of information before walking out of the diner. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of me. My hands trembled with a mix of rage and resolve. I had thought I had already taken back what was mine, but Frank's words lit a new fire in me. I returned to the motel that night and opened the boxes I had so carefully packed. I sorted through everything, touching each item, remembering the moments attached to them. Some things made me laugh, others made me clench my fists. It was as though I was piecing together not just my belongings, but the story of how I had arrived at this place. I realized then that taking back my things was only the first step. Something in me refused to let her rewrite the ending of our story on her terms. The motel walls felt smaller, the ticking clock louder, and I couldn't shake the thought of that black sedan in the driveway. I closed the boxes again, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared into the dark. I knew I had to act. I didn't know how or when, but the thought burned in me like a promise I couldn't ignore. The following night, I couldn't sit still. The motel room pressed in on me with its yellowed wallpaper and humming air conditioner, and no amount of pacing could quiet the thoughts hammering through my head. Frank's words kept replaying, sharper each time, about the people Sarah had been bringing into what used to be our home. I told myself it was none of my business anymore, but the truth was it felt like an insult carved deep into my pride. She hadn't just locked me out. She had invited strangers into the very space where my life had been built. I drove to the street again, headlights off, parking far enough away that no one would notice. The house glowed with light, laughter drifting faintly into the night air. I clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching silhouettes move across the curtains. It was surreal, like staring at a stage play of a life that used to be mine. I imagined her pouring wine, serving food, maybe telling stories about how she was free now, how the house was all hers. The rage boiled hot, but beneath it was a cold calculation. If she wanted the house so badly, fine. She could keep the empty walls and hollow rooms. But everything that had value, everything that carried my mark, I had already taken. What she was left with was a shell, and she didn't even realize it yet. I drove back to the motel, but didn't sleep. At dawn, I went through the boxes again, this time pulling out items I had overlooked before. Old letters, receipts, even warranty papers for appliances we bought together. I felt a strange satisfaction holding on to those details, as if I were keeping proof that the life inside that house hadn't simply been hers. It was mine too, and no matter how many locks she changed or how many people she invited inside, she couldn't erase that truth. Later that day, I received a message from her. Short and sharp, just like before. Stay away. You have no place here anymore. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. Just a command. I stared at the words, and instead of anger, I laughed. A low, bitter laugh that echoed in the empty motel room. She still thought she was in control, still believed she could dictate the rules of this war. But I had already proven that wasn't true. She wanted me gone, and yet it was my absence that haunted her enough to send that message. She couldn't ignore me completely. The following weekend, I returned to the neighborhood in daylight. I walked the block casually, nodding at neighbors, as if I had every right to be there. Some looked at me curiously, others avoided eye contact, but no one stopped me. I paused across the street from the house, taking in the sight of it. The lawn was unkempt, weeds sprouting between the cracks of the walkway. She had always insisted we keep it perfect, but now it looked neglected, as if the house itself knew something was missing. It struck me that she could change the locks, but she couldn't change the fact that she didn't know how to care for it the way I did. That night, I received another unexpected visit at the diner. Frank slid into the booth again, his eyes sharp, his voice low. He told me Sarah had started throwing little parties, that cars lined the street on weekends, and that the noise carried long past midnight. He said it wasn't like her before, that she used to keep to herself, but now it was different. Reckless, careless. Something in me tightened. I knew Sarah well enough to understand that recklessness meant she was spiraling, trying to fill a void she couldn't explain. And that void was me. As he spoke, an idea began to form, dangerous in its simplicity. I realized I had no interest in arguing with her, no desire to step inside that house again for a confrontation. Instead, I wanted her to feel what I had felt, powerless, displaced, stripped of control. She had tried to erase me, and I had taken back my belongings, but now I wanted to leave her with more than just emptiness. I wanted her to confront the silence, the absence, the hollowness she had created. Back at the motel, I opened my notebook and began writing. Not a letter to her, not a confession, but notes, thoughts, plans. I listed every object I had removed from the house and every memory attached to it. I wrote about the dinners we used to share, the arguments over colors of paint, the mornings when the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Line after line, I documented it all until the pages blurred. By the time I stopped, the sun was rising, and I had filled half the notebook. I realized what I was doing. I was preserving what she couldn't destroy. If she wanted to pretend I never existed, then I would create a record she couldn't touch. The next evening, I parked near the house again. This time it was quiet. No cars, no laughter, just darkness. I stared at the windows and thought of the rooms inside. Without the photographs, the furniture we chose together, or the books I had stacked on the shelves, it must have looked empty. A shell, just as I intended. I imagined her walking through it, realizing little by little how much of it had been mine, how little of it was truly hers. The thought brought me a grim sense of peace. But peace didn't last. As I drove away, a new thought rooted itself in my mind. If she could so easily strip me of my home and fill it with strangers, what else was she capable of? What would she do next? And how far would she go to rewrite the story of us? The motel walls offered no answers. The notebook pages whispered of a past I refused to let die, but the future loomed darker, heavier, and I knew I was not finished. I didn't notice when the motel room stopped feeling temporary and started feeling like a cell. The days bled together, work felt mechanical, and every night I returned to that sagging bed and stared at the stacks of boxes that contained the fragments of a life I had clawed back from Sarah's grip. Each box was a reminder of what I had fought for, but also of what I had lost. The silence in that room was different from the silence in the house. It was the silence of exile, the kind that gnaws at your bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that my story wasn't over, that there was still something unfinished pulling me back toward the place I once called home. I drove past the house less often, trying to wean myself from the habit, but I never really stopped. Some nights it was lit up with cars in the driveway, music spilling out of the open windows, laughter that stabbed at me like knives. Other nights it was dark, lifeless, like it had given up. Those nights were worse, because I knew she was inside, pacing those empty rooms, alone with the echoes. Then came the day when I returned from work to find an envelope slipped under the door of the motel. My name scrawled across the front in her handwriting. For a long time, I didn't open it. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, feeling the weight of everything it might contain. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, short sentences written with her usual precision. You took everything. You humiliated me. I don't know who you are anymore. This house feels haunted now. Congratulations. It's finally yours. I read the words over and over, trying to decipher the meaning behind them. Was it anger? Surrender? A plea? I couldn't tell. But one thing was clear. She was cracking. The cold confidence she had thrown at me was gone, replaced by bitterness and exhaustion. I didn't respond. I folded the letter and slid it into the notebook where I had been recording every detail of our unraveling. It was proof, a confession of sorts, that even if she held the deed and the locks, she had lost the war. That night, I lay awake thinking about what those walls meant to me, what they meant to her, and how much damage had been done in the fight for ownership. I realized the house had become a battlefield, neither of us able to claim it fully. It wasn't a home anymore, just a monument to betrayal and defiance. The following week, Frank caught me outside the diner again. He shook his head and told me the parties had stopped, the noise was gone, and Sarah hadn't been seen much at all. He said the blinds stayed shut during the day, lights flickered on late at night, and the place had grown quiet, too quiet. I felt an uneasy satisfaction in hearing that. I imagined her wandering through the empty rooms, running her hands along the bare walls, feeling the absence I had left. I wanted her to feel it, to drown in it, the same way I had drowned in humiliation that night the locks had changed. Still, a part of me wondered if I had gone too far. I questioned whether taking everything was an act of justice or an act of cruelty. But every time I pictured the message she had sent, the cold finality of "this is my house now," the doubt evaporated. She had started this. She had chosen to erase me. I had only made sure she understood what that meant. One evening, I drove to the house one last time. I parked across the street and sat there, engine off, watching the front door. The paint was peeling now, the porch cluttered with boxes she hadn't bothered to move, weeds crawling higher in the yard. The house looked tired, beaten down, as if it had absorbed the war between us and was collapsing under the weight of it. I realized then that whatever love had once lived inside those walls was gone for good. The house was hers, yes, but it was cursed by emptiness, stripped of the life we had built together. I no longer wanted it. I no longer needed it. I started the car and pulled away, leaving the house behind me in the rearview mirror. I didn't know where I was going, and for the first time I didn't care. What mattered was that I was free, that I had taken back what was mine and refused to let her define me. She could keep the shell of the home, the shadows, the silence. I had the boxes, the memories, the proof that I existed. And more importantly, I had the knowledge that I hadn't let her win. As the road stretched out in front of me, I felt lighter than I had in months. The war was over, and while neither of us had truly won, I had made sure I hadn't lost. And sometimes that's enough. If you've stayed with me through this story, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Was I right to do what I did, or did I go too far? Your thoughts matter, and I read every single one.